Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Trail Trash Podcast with three of the trashiest runners in the game, Jason, Garrett, and John. And tonight we are unbelievably fortunate to have somebody with actual running knowledge and actual running success to join us. We have actually, when you think of Beast Coast runners, the guy we have on tonight, he is the real deal. He ran cross country. Um, he has ran UTMB. He has ran Hard Rock. He has ran a 200 miler. He has ran Western States, and he's run Boston. These are all races that the three of us would love to at least run one of them in our lifetime. And you have ran all of them. We are so fortunate to have the great Aaron Saft on with us tonight. Welcome to the show, Aaron. Thanks for being with us.
Oh man, well, thanks for such a great introduction. I'm not sure what else I can say.
You know what? You know what? It's awesome having you on. This is something that I've always enjoyed doing is talking to other runners and hear their story, and especially ones who are coaches, hear their kind of their mindset and their thought process of how they go about coaching. Because good old John here, John is actually underneath Aaron, and
With
underneath, with however politically correct you want to say it. John's had some success, but before we get into all that, why don't you give us a little bit of background about yourself, how you got into running, and anything else you just want to say.
Yeah, sure. We have to go way back to 1990 when this journey began in middle school, cross country. And I met my high school coach coming at the end of my eighth grade year, and he was a very influential person in my life and kind of gave me a lot of guidance, a lot of support. He was a fantastic role model, and somebody that I wanted to be like, as I got older. I wanted to coach. I wanted to do what he did. I wanted to influence kids and help kids and keep people in the sport and let the sport grow. And that's where it all began. My high school career, I ran in New York. I grew up in Middletown, New York, and ran for all 4 years. And we had cross country, indoor and outdoor track. So I ran 3 seasons and did a lot of road races. I actually did trail racing in high school. No ultras. I only read about ultras in at the time Runner's World and Running Times magazine. So just I heard about Western States and I heard about Leadville, these stories, and kind of grew up on hearing about these bigger races, not knowing if I'd ever do one myself. I kind of was amazed by a marathon. The New York City Marathon was live every year. It was on local channels, and I was amazed by the distance of 26.2 miles because when you're in high school, you don't run that far. But to think about 26.2 miles, it's pretty incredible. So I was fortunate enough to get recruited. I ran at NC State, got to run there 5 years. A great time there. We won the ACC championship 5 times while I was there, and we finished third at NCAAs and cross. So I was part of all those teams. So really awesome experience. Post
So
collegiately, I started
Wolfpack.
marathoning. I appreciate that. Post collegiately, I ran a lot of road marathons. That's where I started running Boston, and my road marathon PR was 2:27 at Richmond. And then I ran the trails a lot just as strength building. Still love the running trails. I would run 25Ks as strength building, and just I enjoyed it. I really did. I really enjoyed it. It wasn't until 2000 and I want to say seven. Yeah, I think it was 2007 where I ran my first 50K, and it was at the New River Valley 50K in Virginia. At the time, we were living in Virginia. My wife went to medical school at Blacksburg at Virginia Tech. I decided I wanted to try, stepping up in distance. Really enjoyed it. Still wasn't, I didn't have my mind focused on 100 milers. That wasn't until 2016 when I ran my first 100 miler at Grindstone. I did the now defunct Beast Series, and that was my first 100 mile. And that's from there, since I had qualified for Western and Hard Rock, I decided I'd just keep trying to qualify and, keep putting in my tickets. You mentioned UTMB. I was lucky enough in 2019. I had at the time the way you would get in was through your ITRA points, your International Trail Running Association points, and I was high enough to bypass the lottery. And so I bypassed the lottery, got to run UTMB in 1990. Oh, sorry, 2019. Yeah, a little off there. And then 2021, I got to run Hard Rock, which was amazing as well. And this past year, I did the Grand Slam. I got to run, Western States, Leadville. Vermont got canceled this past year, so I did Badger as my replacement race, and then I finished off with Wasatch. So, pretty amazing races and experiences. I love this sport. I've been a race director. I owned a running store for a while. So yeah, I've been coaching since let's see, I started coaching around the year 2000. Yeah, around 2000, I think. Let me think. Yeah. So 'cause that's when I
Wow,
started teaching.
that's amazing.
Um,
And what he's leaving off, folks. Hold on a minute. I got to stop you a minute. He just didn't run a 50K. He won his first 50K, guys. He won it. And then he's like casually, yeah, Grindstone was my first 100 miler. And he came in second there. Okay. So I mean, come on. I mean, dude, that is flipping amazing. I just got to get the call outs there. So that's awesome. So
Thank you.
uh so, so anyway, that's a wonderful story. Just wonderful story. And so why coaching?
Yeah, like I said, it goes back to my influence. His name was Martin Harnick. He was my high school coach that was just incredible person. It was um somebody that I really looked up to. He was very influential in my life. Did went above and beyond. This guy would bring us the team over to his house to study for the SAT. This is the kind of guy that he was, and had a huge impact on my life. And I became curious. He was only my cross country coach. So what happened for indoor and outdoor is I ended up coaching myself. So I had to start learning how to coach and how to, because my teammates relied on me, the 800 meters to 3200s, they relied on me for workouts. What are we doing today? My track coaches would say, hey, Aaron, what are we doing today? So I learned at an early age just by absorbing everything I could. Everything I got my hands on. There wasn't many books at the time about like training. So I'd read, of course, like, publications and try to get ideas for workouts, what was the idea behind training? And I asked my cross country coach, I'd go to him, what do you think about this? Am I doing this right? And I just began to dial it in high school, really at a really early age, and enjoyed that. I don't think my college coach enjoyed my curiosity, because I would ask. It wasn't intentional. I wasn't trying to be obnoxious. I was curious. I wanted to know, like, what's the point behind this workout? Maybe I didn't ask it right, and maybe that's the problem. But I was curious. I said, "What are we doing? Why? What does this do? Why do we do this in this part of the season?" So that curiosity just, it started blossoming. When I graduated, I moved to Virginia, like I said, with my wife, who became a doctor. And there, people started asking me to coach them. I worked with Ben Thomas, who he's been all over East Coast schools. He went out to Oregon. He was coaching the distance program at the University of Oregon. He's back at Virginia Tech now. I volunteered under him just so I could absorb some more and learn more. And I started asking other coaches to coach me. And I learned different systems, and then more books started coming out. So I started reading more. So I've always been just intrigued by the process. Like, what is it that makes us better? What can we do? And how does that body work to make us more efficient runners? So that's where it stems from. Why do I continue to do it? I absolutely love it. It's so much fun. I enjoy my runners. I try to teach them so they understand what we're doing and why. I want them to be like me in college. I want them to ask me, like, hey, what's the point of this workout? Because if I can't explain it, there's no reason to do it. Like why what's the reason? Right. So we try to explain all that. So it's fun not only being a coach, but explaining this and teaching. And I learn. I'm taking a course with Jason Coop right now. So I still continue to learn and evolve. I try and look at different certifications and whether, I can gain anything from them. When new books come out, I'm always buying books. I drive my wife nuts because our library is so full of books, a lot, which I haven't gotten to yet, but yeah, I have one of those propensities to fall asleep as I start reading. So I guess as soon as I stop, I tend to knock out. So I don't get through books too quickly. But yeah, that's the big emphasis behind coaching.
So let me ask, do you still talk to your coach, or is he still around?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
So
Anytime.
is he still then a major influence on your current coaching and how you interact with your clients? And do you still go to him and say, "Hey, I've got this one client who's really working on this. I thought about this. What do you think?" Is he still that fountain of knowledge for you, even though you've amassed such a wealth of knowledge yourself?
It's more situational. I still coach youth. I coach track and cross country for the high schools. So I'm engaged there. And that's where I say to him, hey, I've got this kid and I just can't reach him, and here's the situation. And we talk that way. But yes, he is still very engaged in my life in the, the youth coaching part of this. Most of my runners, a vast majority are ultra runners, which he doesn't have experience with. I do coach, the whole gambit. um, Yesterday I had a kid PR in the mile, and I had somebody PR in the 100 mile. So
Nice. Good
there's,
job. Good
it's quite
job.
a range.
So, right.
But yes, he's still very engaged, and
And you're
we
equally
communicate
excited
all the
for
time.
each of them. So, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
No, unless it's John. We're not excited about anything John does. No, no. But yeah, so I guess one of the things that I would like to start asking is, why does a runner need a coach? Because a lot of times, when I first started, I made the mistake of thinking running was cheaper than staying in the gym, which is what I did at the time. I was like,
Yeah.
cool, you need some shirts, some shorts, some shoes, and you just go. And then I found out that I made the wrong choice because race fees and all these things. But I
Yeah.
just kind of was just like, cool, I'll just go run. I was never a runner growing up, even though I played soccer. I was always the strongest on the team, not necessarily the fastest. Wasn't bringing up the caboose, but we were pretty close. So, but yeah, so why would you say a runner, especially an ultra runner, needs a coach?
And I'm gonna kind of start by saying that not everybody does, right? Like,
Sure.
there are people that, like, when I have a conversation, I will say, like, it doesn't sound like you want to coach,
Mhm.
and that their eyes get wide and they say, really, I'm coming to you, I want to pay you. I was like, I get that, but like, based on your comments, you may not want to coach. Like, you don't seem to like feedback, you don't seem to like following a plan. So if there's certain things that they don't meet a criteria, then coaching may not be the right avenue for them. But for those that want some guidance, like, they haven't had success at something, they've tried, maybe they get injured, reoccurrent injuries because of overtraining. These are things that I take a look at, because and every coach should, is just take a look at the history of the runner. What's their injury history? What's been going on? How much they've been training? Do they need to train that much? Are they training too fast? These are all questions that need to be asked. And it's somebody that has an oversight, right, and into the past, can then bring forth a plan that will help them hopefully stay healthy, stay on course, and achieve their goal. So again, it's not for everybody, but it is something that, like, helps people with accountability. Some people just need that. They need that person. Some people don't like to think about a schedule. They're like, dude, I just talked to a runner the other night, and he's like, hey man, I hate thinking about what I need to do today. I just want to follow a plan. So there's all sorts of people out there that for coaching, maybe for different reasons and different purposes, and each person's different. But that's what the coach needs to find out is what's their intent, what do they need, what do they want, and how can you meet that demand?
Sure. Sure. And then sometimes they may want to coach, but sometimes like I have a strong personality. Sometimes personalities just don't match, and that is perfectly fine
No, you've
too.
got a strong personality.
I
No,
mean, my wife would certainly
come
agree with
on.
me. So,
Ah, I
so,
never would have
and
said that.
unfortunately for my wife, my daughter has the same kind of personality I do. So she just, God bless her. So, um, yeah. So, John, let me kind of put you on the spot and ask you a question. How did
Sure.
you find Aaron? And
How did I find him?
how did your guys' relationship develop?
I just kind of knew him from like like reputation, from like running around the southeast. For me, deciding to like bring on a coach. There were kind of a few reasons there. When he talks about someone just wanting to fall into a plan, that's me. I don't like thinking about what I have to do. It's just like give it to me, perfect. Um, but when initially talked to him, I had completed my first 100 miler the last fall. And being self-coached, that'll only take you so far if you don't have like a background in like all these things and knowledge bases. um, and being more interested in doing like the longer distance stuff like 100 milers, there's a lot more skills and stuff involved, and so the learning curve for that is like much steeper. So it's like, well, I got through this race on my own, but how much more can I improve that? And at that point, I could see the benefits of bringing on someone with a lot more knowledge and experience than myself, and also a little bit of accountability as well, right?
Yeah. And I let me phrase it this way. The first time I ever met you, Aaron, was very briefly and in passing. And we kind of joke that you used to be a sub 4 minute miler. Am I right? Or you were flirting with it.
Right,
Um,
I was flirting with it. Right.
okay. Okay. And so it was at Hellbender last year. And it was at that one aid station that we had waited so long, we were convinced we had missed John.
Niels
So
Creek. Yes.
yeah.
Yep. I remember.
And so we're all leaving, and we just hear you yell, "He's here!" And we turn, and I'm pretty sure you were running a PR in your mile pace with how fast you were flying down that hill. And then I was like, "Wow, that guy is fast." Woo. So that was my first interaction with you, Aaron. And like I said, it was in passing, but it was like you left a lasting impression for how fast you were flying down that hill to let us know that John had
Uh,
finally got there. So yeah.
that's the
So
worst when you're waiting. I know that.
yeah. So let's kind of talk about that little moment right there. As a coach, you're also
Mhm.
at that point you were the RD
Yep.
for that race, right? And you're not the
Right.
RD
Yep.
for Hellbender anymore, correct?
No longer. Yeah, I get to
Okay.
run this year.
Okay. Um, how hard is that balance there? You've got an athlete coming in, but you've also got a whole bunch of other athletes across the course.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
and it's kind of one of those like I'm sure you want to offer some advice, but you can't offer too much because I've seen what race directors go through, and there's
Yep.
a whole lot of balls that you're juggling at the same time. So,
Yeah.
how
But you,
yeah, how awkward or not awkward, but I guess awkward at the same time is that relationship when you have all those things going on at one time.
you know, I have to just trust my aid station captains and volunteers. And if they need something, they're going to tell me, right? Like I'm going to get a radio saying, "Hey, Aaron, I need this, that, or that other thing," right? So when I'm at an aid station, I'm just checking on the runners and making sure, they're okay, they have what they need. I can't do anything that there's nothing wrong with the course markings. It's just making checking on everything and everyone, right? So I can, thankfully I don't have to I don't have to race direct much anymore, but in that time, I could check on John and you guys had him. I mean, you guys had him under control. I was up at Looking Glass. I was volunteering up at Looking Glass this year, the 100K, and I was up by Mount Pisgah, and a bunch of my runners came through. I think I had about 7 runners in the race, and one was just she just didn't know what was going on, and she was getting high heart rate, having real troubles. And I said, "What have you been drinking?" And she's like, it was one of the mixes. I said, "Is it caffeinated?" And she says, yeah, it's caffeinated. I said, how much Coke did you just drink? And I said, I think you're over caffeinated. And she's like, oh my gosh, you're right. Because I mean, she had been drinking caffeine since she started in the morning. So I mean, it's problem solving with them, right? Just like you guys do as crew. But you know, there's times where you can be a coach, right, and try to coach them up. And there's times where you just need to step aside. You know, they're
Mhm.
fine. Like they're good. They don't need you, right? You just check and make sure, like, you want me to fill your bottles? Like that's all you need to ask, right? Because they're on it, you know. But there's other times where you have to coach and you have to sit down and say, hey, this is that moment. This is the one you wanted, you know, this is the moment you said, I want that, you know, it's tough, it's hard, I'm breaking down. This is where you have to decide, like, what am I going to do forward, right? Like, so here we are. How's it going to go? You know,
Right.
so you just have to remind of that sometimes. And that's just knowing the athlete's goals. When you get to know the athletes and their goals, and then that moment comes, you know, I get phone calls. Like, you know, I don't know if you guys saw the Conqueror this weekend. That's at Amicalola Falls. Did you guys see this? Like last man standing race,
I,
$10,000 on the line.
oh, that's a
Um,
lot of money. No, I
yeah,
didn't.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So Chris Roberts, I believe, is still in it. But anyhow, you know, I had a guy in there and he calls me up, you know, and like I don't mind if an athlete calls me. If, I mean, as long as it's not middle of the night and my phone, because I don't keep my phone next to me. But you know, they call me and ask questions, and that's okay. You know, I am their research. I'm part of their team, right? That's what I tell them all the time. It's like you got to have your team. I'm part of it, right? But there's other people to this team, you know, whether it be a physical therapist, sports psychologist, whoever it is, right? Like you've got a team. I'm part of it. So, you know, use me as your resource. I've been there, right? Like I've been through a lot of these races. So, like, you know, rely on me. Like ask me questions. I've probably been in that dark moment too, and we can talk you through it. But you know, that's the fun part about being a coach. I mean, it's the hard time, but when you get through it together, you really form a bond, a relationship, which is really cool.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
I have a question for you. I've been fortunate enough to talk to several different coaches, between, um, Jeff Browning, who does coaching. I got to, talk to Tony White, who's a local guy who does coaching. And what's interesting about them is listening to their mindset around how they build out their plans. I know, like with Jeff Browning, he is a big guy with like workouts, like strength training and stuff like that. So because that's what works for him, and obviously, who's going to argue with Jeff Browning and how he builds a plan, right? The guy just
Sure.
is like a flipping machine that just churns out wins. I think he just
Yep.
won his 52nd 100 miler and he's 52. So anyway, so when your coaching philosophy and your mindset around how you coach, can you talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, so this is a shared journey, right? Like this is communication. That's the biggest thing with me and coaching is my athletes need to communicate to me. How are they feeling? How are things going? Where do they feel their weaknesses? Where are our problems lying? What do we need to work on? But when I look at a plan, I look at it and I start from the race and I go backwards, right? So when we look at planning, you know, we don't want to have a massive training block, right? Like we want to cut it to a certain amount of time based on the length of the race. So we look at that and we want to do what is most similar or simulate the race closest to the race, right? So do the work that's going to make the most benefit towards the race, you know, just before the taper, in other words. So with a 100 miler, that's going to be probably your max volume phase. Now, what do you do during the max volume phase aside from doing all of your training and volume? You simulate the course the best you can as often as you can, right? So for a course, for instance, like Hellbender, right? You're doing a lot of vertical gain, a lot of vertical gain, loss, descent. You're trying to replicate those long climbs, whether it be on a treadmill or whatever, right? Like you're trying to replicate the course the best you can during that phase. Then moving backwards, it's, you know, we do long intervals. John's very familiar with the long intervals. And long intervals, they're sustaining a faster pace for longer periods of time. that's the next most similar thing. So what's the next piece before that? That's going to be the short intervals, because we're working on the high end system, which is least important to an aerobic athlete doing a long distance event, right? So that's the furthest away from the event. We can recover quickly from that because we have so much training behind it. If we put that closer to the race, now we've created all this fatigue right before the event. You don't want to do that, right? Especially if you're running a 100-miler. So we're working backwards, right? And then, of course, before that, you're doing strides, you're building your base. So it works backwards. So from most specific, closest to the event, to least specific, furthest away from the event.
Yeah. Now you mentioned you mentioned Hellbender.
Mhm.
So let me just pick your brain and really ask the coach on this one. So I'm looking at 25, not Hellbender, but the U-Ray 100.
Okay.
And that's 42,000 feet of climbing alone, 83,000 feet of elevation change.
Yep.
Middle Tennessee does not have that.
Understood.
It really, really does not.
Yep.
How would you take someone, and you could even say, okay, let's take, someone who's much closer to sea level, who wants to do one of these more mountainous races. Are you saying, go to the gym, find a gym, get a treadmill, do whatever, and just crank that thing up and just start running uphill? Are you incorporating strength training in compound movements, squats, deadlifts, things like that? Not so much isolation and all that stuff to build the leg muscles up that way. Combination thereof, are you utilizing a stair stepper? So for someone like me who's looking already at 25, because my 24 is pretty much already planned out with the races that I have. How would you say, okay, great, this is what you would need to do starting now to make sure your base is ready for that?
So I always start with what they have access to, right? Because I don't want them to have to spend a lot of extra money. So the gentleman that's training out in Wilmington, North Carolina, right? Completely flat, but he wants to do mountain race, and that's great. So I said, well, what do we have access to? And he says, well, I have 15% on the treadmill. I said, all right, what else? Like, so we got to practice some downhills, right? Like, how are we going to do the downhills? What's that going to look like? I was like, do you have a parking garage? And he's like, yeah, I do. I was like, excellent. All right, you're going to run up the steps, right? We're going to go up the steps, and then I'm going to have you run down the deck. Okay. So it's just what you have access to replicate these, and Ure, like, John Kelly was amazing. He was training in, I think, Washington, D.C., and he had like a hill that was like maybe like, I think he said it was like 0.17, like, less than a quarter mile, right? But he did hundreds of repeats on that thing. And that's what he had, right? But that's how he trained for Barkley. I mean, insane, right?
That's not unlike when we were all living in Murfreesboro. We had a local David Jones who trained for Badwater while we were living out there, just doing repeats on these tiny little hills out at the battlefield.
Yeah, it's whatever you got, right? Like that's what you make use of, right? So yeah, you mentioned treadmill. That's a great tool to use for inclines, but you got to remember there's declines too. As you mentioned, there is a lot of loss. So how are you going to replicate the downhills? Because that can't be replicated with anything else but downhills. No matter what you do, no matter how strong you are or what you work, no other forces can replicate that running downhill. So that's what you have to remember is, yeah, we can work the uphills by doing a ton of those things that you mentioned, but we also have to do the downhills. So if it's a parking garage, like the gentleman in Wilmington, he's got 5 stories. I said, well, that's the 5 stories we're going to be doing over and over. Like, just get used to it, right?
Yep, and
So
you'll be cursing me a lot doing them, but that's what I got. That's what you got to do.
That's what you got to do, right? That's what you got to do.
No.
So
I had a coach before.
Title.
Right? Yeah. I had a coach before who lived in Florida, and he's done a bunch of West Coast races. He's from Flagstaff, so he's used to those kind of things. But he's like, yeah, I find my parking garages, and and he has a couple around him, and he'll run to one, do a couple there, he'll run to the other one because he's like, I'm tired of this one, and then he'll go find another one, and then he'll
or the bridges, right?
Yep.
The bridges.
So
whatever you got, sometimes you got to be creative, but just look at what you got, and I mean that's why I talk with them and say, all right, let's be creative. What can we do?
And do you recommend strength training?
I do, especially for aging athletes like myself. There's so many benefits to strength training. John recognizes we have phases of strength training. When we get to maximum volume, the focus should be on volume, right? Like
Sure.
you don't want to add a ton of extra fatigue, so you don't want to be lifting heavy during that time. If you want to do some core work to keep the core strong, sure, that's great. But like, honestly, I basically take strength training off unless the athlete says, "Hey, my PT says I need to do X, Y, or Z." Then heck, do X, Y, and Z because the PT tells you to. But I don't want, I want them to focus all their energy and time on running because that's what's going to benefit them most.
Sure. So it sounds almost like your standard off season. Go ahead and put some extra plates on
Yeah.
there. You're fine then because we're
Yep.
we can focus on it at
Right.
this point. But once the training block starts, once race season starts, if you will, that's when we've got to cut back, lower the weight a whole lot.
Yeah.
Do it when you
Yeah.
need
And
to. But yeah,
we've partnered with a strength coach. And so if people are truly interested in strength training and having, strength training truly programmed, I refer them to him. He is a great resource. So I'm not like, I always try to stay in my lane.
right.
I'm a run coach. Like I understand strength training to a certain extent. Am I comfortable in totally programming it? Not, I understand enough that I can say, okay, this is the phase that we want to do this X, Y, and Z, and here's the basic things that we can do. But if you're interested in making the biggest gains for strength training, then having somebody that's obviously more educated and potentially certified in strength training would be
Right.
more benefit.
You're a certified run coach, not a CSCS.
Yes.
And
Right.
it's for those who don't know, certified strength conditioning specialist, CSCS. So, side story, that's what I wanted to be in high school, is I wanted to go down that road. So, so when I say I was the strongest, I kind of was. So for soccer players anyway. So, but yeah. So that was a selfish question on my part, especially
All good.
planning
Yeah.
my 25. So
I looked at Ure too. If I hadn't have got into High Lonesome this year, I was going to sign up for Ure.
All right.
So yeah.
So the big question is, how do you condition runners? We figured out how to do the replicate altitude, not altitude, but the elevation. How do you prepare for altitude? So like for like races like UTMB, Leadville, where you're going to have a little.
because Uray has significant time above 10,000 feet, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So how would you I mean, so how would you work on something like that? So I mean, like, do you recommend those masks, or what does that look like?
So the biggest thing is to be as fit as you can, right? That's the best thing you can do for yourself. And that's, as I was talking about earlier, conditioning yourself with all of the systems. We're talking through lactate threshold, we're talking through the peak VO2, doing all those work so you get yourself as fit as possible. There's not a lot of extra that you can do other than being out at altitude. I've seen altitude tents backfire on people. Have you guys met Johnny Clemens or know the name Johnny? Johnny Clemens? No,
Yeah.
he's a Tennessee boy. He did Hard Rock the year I did. Actually, Jeff Browning coached him and had a altitude tent. Now, let's just say it probably wasn't the altitude tent sport. I think it was his plan. He wanted to go out with Courtney. So he wanted to run with Courtney through early parts of the course. And I think he redlined a little too much at too high of an altitude. But yeah, he had spent the money on an altitude tent. And I saw him going up handies, and he did finish to his credit. But it was a tough go. But getting out there, obviously, as early as you can. But understanding that 3 weeks is probably the best, and that's really hard for a lot of us. I've been trying to convince my wife to let me go out there about 2.5 to 3 weeks early this year for High Lonesome, so I can acclimate and camp out and enjoy life a little bit.
How's that going so far?
It's a work in progress.
That's yeah. I would have to convince my wife, my 5-year-old, and my employer.
Well,
Say,
my
hey,
daughter's
yeah.
my daughter's going to come with me, and thankfully, coaching I can work remotely. But yeah, my daughter would come with me, which would be cool because she really enjoys the mountains and crewing and all that experience. So, but I'll say that the thing that you don't want to do is get there 3 days before. Sometimes that's what it works out to. At 3 days before, if we're looking at a bell curve, you're in the trough of the lowest point of your adaptation phase. So this is like 3 days out. When you come in 3 days out and the race is on the third day, that's when you're in a trough and you're going to feel the worst that you you will the whole time you're there. So, 5 days out is a little bit better. Obviously, the further you go out, obviously the better. Again, 3 weeks being ideal. 7 days is not bad. I did, I think, 5 days prior to Hard Rock, and I was okay. I mean, I definitely felt it at 14. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to feel it at 14, but 5 days I was okay at Hard Rock. But
So would
so
it?
far as being, go ahead.
So if you can't get out there that early,
Yeah.
is it best to just fly in the day before and
Yes.
then
Yeah.
just
I mean,
hope that the jet
24
lag
hours.
is, hope the jet lag isn't
Yeah.
too bad, and now it's not too
Right.
bad for us, being central time, there's only 2 hours behind, but if you're
Right.
coming from somewhere way far away, that could be an
Yeah.
issue. So it
Sure.
almost sounds like if your race is Saturday at 6 a.m., fly in midday on Friday, maybe late afternoon on Friday. Um,
uh, that's the body starts making adaptations after 24 hours. And that's why they say fly in, as close as you can to the race, right? Like, so if you flew in 12 hours before, then you get on the line 12 hours after you arrived. Your body's not going to start making the altitude acclimatization until another 12 hours. So you've got like 12 hours to play with, right?
mhm.
So yeah, flying in, is like right before that can can work to your advantage as well. Yep.
All right. Look for flights around that time. um, um, those were really kind of just really the only selfish questions I have, and I do want to be respectful of your time. So,
Oh, good. I
yeah,
heard you ask about zone two and how can you make yourself feel better?
dude, oh
I
my
heard that.
gosh, yeah. So, yeah, so Jason and I are techies. Like we nerd out on data, we nerd out on gadgets. We both have a Whoop. I think Whoop is great as like Wikipedia. It's a great place to start, but don't go quote it in a thesis.
Right.
It's kind of like so I do mortgages. It's kind of like Credit Karma. It's a great place to start. Don't don't go basing your pre-approvals off it though, right? But so it's great for it tracks my sleep spot on. Like it doesn't miss that. But if I'm wearing it on the wrist, the heart rate data that it feeds to my Garmin tends to be a little off, especially if I relate that to the Garmin HRM Pro Plus, which I ended up buying. So I use that because you optical versus sensors. Obviously, the
Yes.
sensor one is going to
Right.
be a whole lot more spot on. So Zone 2, when I was doing it with the Whoop, I got passed by a lady power walking her dog, and I was I was embarrassed to say the least. But according to what it was feeding my watch, I was still flirting with that higher zone 2, lower zone 3, and I'm walking. It felt like I would have been better served just walking because it was faster than the
Yeah.
pace that I would have had to go.
Right.
So when someone's in the middle, do you condone zone 2 training? Do you do a lot of zone based training? And then also, how does someone get more comfortable running slower and just knowing that, hey, this is the plan. Zone 2 is what we got to stay with. Because I know that a lot of doctors, mainly Peter Attia, have started really saying, and David Goggins condones a whole lot of zone 2 stuff. It seems to be that the science for longevity supports zone based, zone 2 specifically training. Does that correlate to ultra marathons? And then how do you get someone comfortable running at a zone 2 pace when they just, like me, see someone on the other side of the street and just want to take off and race? Like,
Understood. Yeah. So the heart rate metric is a great tool for me to understand how hard the run was, right? Like what was the runner doing? I can actually get a valid metric that says, as long as they're wearing, as you said, a heart rate strap, right? Like I want to make sure it's sensors and not optical. Some people can get optical to work okay. And I think it still tends to read a little bit high. But yeah, as I said, it's a great metric just to kind of make sure they're not going too hard. I'd like to prescribe an RPE just so, and the way I do it is I start them off, and if they want to understand their RPE or rating of perceived exertion, so it's basically how you feel, then you can look at your heart rate and say, okay, this is how, a conversational pace should go. This is how an easy jog should go, right? Based on my heart rate. So they start to feel that. Once they start to understand what the body feels like at that, then they can start to wean off of heart rate, right? And then we start to implement runs based off of their rating of perceived exertion, because they understand what that feels like. So it's kind of a transitional process. Now, to go back to zone two, the reason zone two works so well is that it builds so many capillary beds. It builds the mitochondria, which are the power, houses of our cells. That's where we gain our energy from, right? So it does so much for us aerobically and cardiovascularly that it is a great zone to train. And if you can run 100 miles and stay as much in zone two as you can, especially early on, you're going to feel so much better late in the race, right? You're still going to be able to run late in the race. So once people start to run at first, like you said, it may be just walking at first to kind of get used to zone two. It's amazing what the body does, adaptations by building those things that we talked about to get the body fitter. Now, what has to happen though is you have to spend a longer time in that, like I had somebody that was like, doing a streak mile, right? And they were doing that in zone two because it was like their recovery day. I said, you're not going to gain as much benefit if you did like an hour per se, right? Like if I did it an hour in zone two, I'm going to gain so much more from that, right? Than just doing a streak mile, right? Because then we're going to be building and have so much more time in that zone. Now, is that just a walk at start? Yes, it could be just a walk at start. Obviously the body just understands what the heart rate is doing, right? We don't understand, like when you look at the metrics of the heart rate, it gives you in time, right? The body doesn't understand miles. That's our ego when we're thinking about like how many miles I did or how many miles I ran, right? That's just our ego part of this. We base everything off, and John and I work in time. I prescribe time because that's what the body understands. It understands the stress of how much time it was out there and how much time it spent in the various heart rate zones. So over time, the Z2 speed gets a lot faster. So for instance, 2 weeks ago, I started after I had pneumonia. So I started coming back, and I started coming back with just easy zone two running. But I was running at like 10:30 pace, right? Just on my treadmill, flat, no incline. And then now I'm down to 840 pace at zone two on a 2% incline. So it's the body makes adaptations rather quickly if you allow it to, and if you do it consistently. That's the part of it that a lot of people miss. So, and this doesn't have to be throughout training. It can just be the base phase of your training for a few weeks and let that system grow, because that's the foundation, right? Now the body can sustain faster paces for longer periods of time, because actually your max VO2 increases while you're in zone two, which is incredible. And that's why they say run slower to get faster, because you're actually increasing your max VO2 in zone two, which is like the slowest running speed, right? That's the weirdest thing to anybody. Why on earth am I not running in zone four? Why am I not running faster to get faster? Well, that's because the body doesn't allow us to get faster in zone four for an extended period of time. We build up an acidity within the blood, a fatigue in the body, that it can't clear it fast enough if you're running on a consistent basis, right? It takes about 24 hours for the body to shuttle out lactate if you're running in zone four consistently, right? So at 5 or 6 weeks, the body's like, hey, like I'm tapped. Like you've done everything that I can do to get you any better in zone four. Whereas in zone two, you can exponentially, in theory, continue to get better, right? In zone two. So that's why it's so important in the foundation to include so much zone two. Now, it's also important in that max volume phase to include some zone two, because what are you going to do in an ultra? Are you going to try to stay in zone four all the time? No, like we always talk about, we always train too fast, right? Like our normal training pace is so much faster than our 100-mile training pace. Now, what does that do? Well, we're not using the same muscles that we will in the ultra. So now you're not training the muscles that you plan to use for 100 miles. So what happens there? Those muscles that you now use in the 100-miler fatigue out faster because they're not used to being used. So that's why we have to implement this slower training system so that you're ready. Skeletal muscular system is ready, cardiovascular system is ready. You've got the whole body ready to go for 100 miles.
So Aaron's zone 2 is my like zone 15. So I just wanted to put that out there.
I did see you when he said the 840. You were just like, oh my god.
I was saying the hell with that BS.
No. Well, Aaron is a much more established runner than you and I are, Jason.
Oh, but and we will never be that established, ever. But I guess I don't want to steer away from coaching, but I do want to ask.
Sure.
I do want to ask what when you think about your running career, it's obviously not done, but up to this point, what achievement stands out to you? Like, what are you most proud of when you? I mean, because your resume is top shelf. You know, what stands out to you as, man, I am so proud of this effort. I'm so proud of what I put in to accomplish this. What out of your whole resume, what is that?
Um, it's a great question actually, because my passion for this comes from really just my love of the sport, right? And my love of the sport, it's now radiating to my kids. And my kids are into this sport and they see what I'm doing. And that builds and gives me so much fire. And I talked about this once on my podcast. It was something that was said at Leadville. So Ken Kluber, he said that, you've got a debt to pay, not just to yourself for all the work that you put in to get to that starting line, but to all those that help you get there. You owe them that finish, and you owe them to get as far as you can and do everything you can to get to that finish line. And if you get taken off the course, it's because you timed out, not because you sat in an aid station feeling sorry for yourself, because you just moved too slowly because you were too tired to get any further. And that's when it's okay for you to be pulled from this course. And I sat down at Winfield at the halfway point. My legs were cramping, having come just over Hope Pass, dehydrated beyond belief, just in a lull, right? This is 100-miler number 3 of the summer. And I'm frustrated. I'm tired. I'm fatigued. I don't have a pacer for, quite some time still. And I have to go back up and over Hope Pass. And I'm thinking to myself, like, how am I going to do that? I got there, my drop bag, somebody had gone through it, rifled through it, and took all the stuff that I needed out of it. Which, again, I was like, oh, gosh, like, things are just not going right. But then I started to ask around. I said, hey, do you have any electrolyte pills? Hey, do you have any, fluids like that, powders that I can use? Because do you have any gels? Because they took everything. I had nothing left in my drop bag except for like a buff. And so, I gained everything. And then I sat there, I took some drinks trying to rehydrate. And I thought to myself about what Ken said. And I said, I do have a debt. I do have a debt to my wife and to my kids for letting me be here. And I need to get my butt out of this chair, and I need to get back to my crew at Twin Lakes and move on and get this race done so I can move on and get to Wasatch. And so I think that was the moment I realized there was more to this whole running thing than, what had been in the past. That I realized, my love and affinity, not only for my sport, but for my family, for my friends, for everybody that's been a part of this. That became a huge part of my why, my part of moving forward, because it really got me out of that chair. And I don't know if I really could have otherwise. I was definitely I was in a really bad place. And the same thing happened at Wasatch. I ran a fever. I was sick. I sat under a tree, just dehydrated, 90 degrees. It was the only shade I could find. I had a pacer, thank God. And I lost my voice. I was totally just wrecked. This, whatever virus was passing through my system had just tanked me. And we're just past 50K. Long time to go. Last race of the Grand Slam. And we called my wife and I heard her voice. And that's all it took. It stood me up and, she said, get him to the aid station, give him some Tylenol. Let's break the fever, keep pumping fluids in him. He's going to be fine. Just get him to the finish line. And it's just amazing what, the voice of those that you love, even a simple picture can do to keep you moving forward, when that's a part of your why. So I think that's, my fondest memory and biggest thing and even though it's so recent, like that's not to say that there isn't special moments in my running career, but that was probably the most special because I realized how deep and passionate I am, not only for my sport, but for my family.
Right. I think that's a wonderful story because like I think a lot of times what gets lost in this is the sacrifice of the family, right? When you think about and this is going to sound so small, but I remember when I finished my first half marathon and my family was there, it had felt like I had literally won like a championship, right? Because they had been there watching me put in all this work to accomplish this goal, and I did it, right, and they were there, and it just made that moment like so much better, and it meant so much more that I don't want to say that I proved I could do it, but that all that sacrifice that they made so that I could be in that moment was not for nothing at all. And so I think that's a great story. And it's more than just like you didn't say when I finished UTMB or when I ran Boston or I 200-mile Bigfoot, it was you know, pulling myself out of the chair, making those decisions to be there, to show that all that work was for nothing. And I think that's huge. And I think that is awesome. So
Thank you.
John, you barely said 2 words. What have you got, buddy?
I got I don't know. I think one question we could throw out just for the benefit of our audience is so now that we're touching a little bit on the mental side of things, what would you say to someone, say, who isn't quite getting the results that they want? Like they keep trying and trying, but they haven't reached that tipping point in their running career and haven't gotten that race result or finish or whatever it is that they keep trying to get, but for some reason haven't been able to. Just and just to try to not get too down, especially in our current society where we can pop on social and just see everyone flashing their big shiny buckles or awards or whatever from the weekend.
Right. And so it's, I think as we talked about, John, because, I tried to turn you on to the Daddy Bracy Brook, right? The mental training for ultra running, right? Yep, there it is.
It's my mouse pad right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So there is, there's so much to start with, right? And when you sign up for a race, that's where the mental training begins, right? That's where they have to decide what is it about this race that is going to light their fire, right? Like it can't be an extrinsic buckle, right? That can't be the sole reason, right? There has to be intrinsic value to this that's going to, get you up in the morning and get you training. That's going to get you through those dark times. That's going to get you out there to do long runs in the rain. Like there's got to be more to it, right? And that's what using that tool can help you and develop tools to give you confidence that like, okay, so when race day comes and, stuff starts to go wrong, this is what I can do. I've already started to create these tools to implement when things go wrong. I've thought about, okay, when this happens, what do I do? Right. So it doesn't become magnified when you're in the race. And that's what happens is things start to magnify. They start to become bigger and bigger. And the problem seems to outweigh any possibility of a solution. And so having that up front, creating those problem solving techniques and understanding. And if there's something that you think of and you don't have a solution, again, that's when you refer to your team and you say, hey, I've got this thing and I can't think of what I would do if this popped up. Or, hey, what are some things that have popped up for you and how did you solve them? Those are great conversations to have, be it with your running partners, with your coach, whoever you trust, right? Like those are awesome long run questions, right? Like what are some things that have happened to you and how did you get through them, right? And so having those tools at your disposal, it can help you get through them. Now, how do we talk to somebody that's not seeking or gaining the results that they want? And that's a big part of ultra, right? And that's a conversation I actually had the other day. And this gentleman is a wonderful person. big goals, big goals, and awesome. I tip my hat off to him for wanting to go after these big goals, and that's that's incredible, especially as a very new ultra runner. It's I said to him, listen, you came to the sport with big goals. You do have great ideas for why you want to do these. You have great goals and you have great reasons why. And now it's really just trying to understand and learn through these processes and through your failures, because failures happen. And if we don't take away from them, if we don't learn from them, then we're going to make the same mistakes in the future, right? So we have to process and accept that we had a failure. It's okay to be mad about it. That's okay. Like we can go through the steps of grieving. That's okay. It's okay to be mad about it. It's okay to be frustrated. And then, we keep moving forward, but we learn what went right, what went wrong, and how do we change what went wrong. We learn those lessons. And it's never a guarantee. An ultra is never a guarantee. I've had ultras where I thought I was really well trained, and at 16 miles, we'll call the race cruel, Jewel. I started cramping massively, and at 21 miles, I was out of the race, and I thought I was really well trained for it. Everything went right before the race, tapered, ready to go, and at 21 miles, I was out of the race. So things happen, and it sometimes it's beyond our control. But it's how do we react to it? How do we take away from it? How do we move forward from it? So, understanding that failure is a part of our sport. And it's hard because, like you said, in social media, we just see a lot of the positives. And that's why in social media, when I have a failure, I try to post it too and talk about it and say, hey, this wasn't my day. Here's what happened. I know what happened. I know what I did. Here's what I did, and here's how I messed up. And, I think people can learn more from that than, I mean, we love posting the shiny buckles. We do. I mean, I love posting my shiny buckles too. But we have to say, here's the bad, right? Here's the bad side of it, because people don't see that and they think that failure is not part of the sport, but it is. Leadville had I think a 44% finisher rate. I mean, that's huge for, we had it's supposed to be close to 1,000 starters.
Yeah, I
And I
mean,
mean,
even Getty
300,
this year had like close to like 50%, which is just crazy to me on that
right?
course.
Yeah, it happens though, right? Things
Yeah,
happen, and that's what people have to understand is this sport is not a guarantee. That's the hard part of it, right? Like
yeah,
we certainly want to, we do everything in our power to, but sometimes it's just not the day. And those are the hard conversations as a coach to have afterwards, because like you want to be sympathetic, because what I feel like I failed them in some way, like I mean, John had his DNFs, and it's like, as a coach, I first think to myself, what could I have done differently? That's the question I ask, and then we have a debrief, right? Like John and I talk. We go through it. What happened? How did you feel? What do you think when, we look at the race and say, okay, did you go out too hard? How's nutrition? We go through it all, right? And talk about it. What was the lessons learned? But it's okay to fail. I think in a society where everybody gets a medal, we have to remember too, like, sometimes we fail at things, and that's part of it, and that's where we grow.
Well, that's solid. I think that's good stuff. So I guess, just being cognitive of time. Guys, do we have anything else for Aaron before we try to wrap things up with him? We've chewed up a lot of a lot of time. And I feel like we could go for at least another hour. I know, hell, I could go for at least another hour just talking to him about his races.
You're always welcome to have me back. I'm always happy to come back on. It's an honor. Thank you.
So anything else, guys?
No, I do just want to say thank you for your time. It's been incredibly valuable. Selfishly, it's been great. I know that a bunch of people that listen to this will take at least something away from it. So I do want to say thank you for your time. And you touched on it, man. Family is such a powerful thing, especially when you're in those moments. Sharing a little story that I had. So my wife is my crew everywhere I go. Like it does not matter. She is my crew chief. All decisions are made by her, even though she is not a runner. My first and to date only 100-mile finish. I came into the mile 82 aid station, beat the best way I can describe it is beat to shit. And I looked at her, and before the race we had a talk, and I said, if it looks like the life is gone from my eyes, we need to have a real hard talk. If it doesn't, then you say what you have to say to get me out there. And so I came in, I was probably 3 hours behind when she expected me to be there. And she sat me in the chair and she goes, "Is this medical?" I said, "No, just everything hurts." And she goes, "Okay, sit down." She had never been a crew before. You could not tell. She rips my vest off. She goes and fills stuff up. She's like, "Just untie your shoes by the time I get back." So she takes my socks off. She puts some squirrel's nut butter on my feet, and she looks up, and I get teary eyed every time I think about it. She looks at me and she says, "There's a 3-year-old girl at home who expects her daddy to finish. I don't know what you have to do, but only you can do it. So figure it out." And she tied my shoes. She gave me my vest. She pulled me out of the chair and she shoved me. Um, and family is such a powerful thing, and they can get you through those hard times when you just want to stop and you just want the race to end because everything hurts. So it's nice to hear someone else have that same thing. And when I go to races by myself, you touched on it, pictures. I take pictures with me and I put them in drop bags. And I have, so if there's 5 aid stations or 5 drop bags anyway, I'll put 5 pictures in there. And they're all pictures of my family. So I'm like, great. I keep them with me. And then, great, I've only got 4 more sets of pictures to get. I've only got 3 more sets of pictures to get. I get to see my daughter 2 more times along this race, and I've got to see my daughter along these ways. So it's nice to hear that I'm not the only weird one that does things like that. So, but
Absolutely,
yeah,
man. That's
no, thank you
beautiful.
so much. Thank you so much for your time. Where can people connect with you? Probably stealing Jason's last question here. Where can people connect with you? Where can people reach out if they're interested in your coaching services? What's the best way? I'll link it in show notes. Put your contact information there if you want, whatever contact
Sure.
information you want. But that way people can reach out, see if coaching's right for them, see if you're a good fit for them, and see, how you can help other people along this journey we
Yeah.
call ultras.
I appreciate that. Thank you. The stable is pretty full right now of athletes, so always okay to check in. You can visit me on my website, runningislife.run. It's my website. You can find me on Instagram, Running is Life Coaching. I'm on Facebook as Aaron Saft. I've got a YouTube channel, the podcast, obviously, Running His Life. So any of those is great. Reach out, find me on Strava. People ask me questions on Strava all the time, and I love it. I think it's great. I get all sorts of training questions. I'm here to help. I don't charge if you want to ask me questions about running. I've had people like do a Zoom call with me, and like, "Oh, I got to pay you," and you don't. Like, I'm just here to help. I really enjoy helping. So I'm here for questions. I'm here to help. So thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, Jason, go ahead and take us out.
So to take us out and I want to say, talking about people who try again and don't get their results, it looks like the Buffalo Bills are not going to get their results again tonight and are going to be yet another team that has never won a Super Bowl. So don't look like they're going to pull it out against Kansas City. But we have had a wonderful conversation. I mean, Aaron, having you here has been a true pleasure. I love having people on to hear their thought process, their mindset around running. I love to hear about their stories and how they run. And you have delivered a jewel of knowledge tonight and everything, and we truly appreciate it. So thanks for coming on, and we definitely will have you on again. Anytime you want to, we'll definitely bring you back. So we appreciate you, and
Thank you.
and until then, that is it. Everybody have a good evening, and we'll see you later.